Well, last week was a week, and I think in the middle of the week, I decided that I wanted to actually change directions in terms of what I wanted to share today. Last week, we kicked off a new series called COMMUNITAS, and I'm very, very excited about this series, and I'm excited that we're diving into it. And last week, we talked about love being the foundation of Communitas. And I know some of you guys were not with me or with us last week, and maybe some of you guys have forgotten. We'll circle back to do a recap in just a moment. But I had two very heavy conversations, one on Monday, one on Tuesday, and then we had the political violence that we were all exposed to on Wednesday dominating our news cycle. And it was really, really heavy. Just the impact of those conversations that I had and the impact of what we all experienced. So I really felt compelled to circle back to continue what we talked about last week and how communitas, this idea of what communitas is, being a foundation of love. And so for those of you who missed it last week and those of you who need a recap, let me just restate for some of us what communitas means. Now, I know we're smart people. We can deduce or we can come up or use our context clues to realize that communitas is related to community. And yes, it refers to community, but not in the way that we think about it. In our modern culture, we tend to kind of gather and connect around identity or activity. Like we're identity or we're activity centered. So, these are our different ethnic groups. We tend to be ethnic oriented, or we tend to be industry oriented. I'm an artist, or I'm in tech, or I'm a part of the medical community. And it's not that those things are bad. Those things are good. And we understand the value of that kind of community. It has its place. But communitas is a little bit different. It goes wider and it goes deeper. And it's a higher level of commitment. And so here's the definition that we're going to put on the screen. And this is, again, we talked about this last week. A fellowship of people. This is what communitas is. A fellowship of people who commit themselves to one another and gather in the context of an ordeal, a challenge, danger, or disorientation. Some modern examples of that, as I mentioned last week, sports teams, like fire and rescue teams, the military, they all gathered around a challenge or a mission that is very different than how we live in the everyday world, which is why that word disorientation is used as a part of communitas, because it is very different than the world that we live in. And the characteristics of communitas has to do with adventure. The people themselves are not risk averse, and they boldly step into the challenge and allow themselves to be shaped by the challenge or the mission, to be shaped and to be developed by it. Now, most community, as we think about it and as we describe and experience it, is really more around providing safety and comfort. And again, that is necessary. But communitas is a commitment around a mission that is usually uncomfortable. It is usually something that is the opposite of how we gather together or how we kind of form community. The disorientation is what makes it challenging, but it is also the aspect of this whole thing that continues to shape us and to develop us. Football, for example, is very disorienting. I was a football player for quite a while. Actually had the opportunity to do chapel for the Cleveland Browns last night. Those of you who are Ravens fans, just relax. Everybody needs Jesus. But football is a very kind of disorienting thing, just to kind of give you an example, because grown men are running around as fast as they can trying to run into each other. Like, there's something a little off about that. And I know that I realize now that I'm a little off because I love the game and I played it. But it is very disorienting because it is a different way of life that is not normal to us. And when we think about COMMUNITAS and this idea of community, it's very easy or much easier to form community around comfort and surface level sameness. It's easier to do that, and we enjoy doing that. But Jesus demonstrates and models and calls his disciples. So whoever is going to follow him, he calls them to something much deeper, something very uncomfortable and inconvenient commitments of engagement. He called political and social enemies together to be his disciples. Do you realize, and I think many of us don't, that Jesus' 12 disciples, these guys would not have been friends. They would not have hung out. They were not in the same circles. Some of them, if they saw each other in the street, it would have been on. And here's the thing that's interesting to me about this, as we have been experiencing all of this back and forth this week with the political violence that we saw and the assassination and all of this very just tragic stuff. What was even more tragic is seeing the division of people who say they follow Jesus, for people who say that they are disciples, for people who say that they are fully submitted to Jesus' ways, displaying something completely opposite. People celebrating the death of someone who represents the Imago Dei, and others who are also elevating this person who was assassinated and just completely dismissing all of the other things that were said. Like, all of this back and forth and all of this confusion around what it means to follow Jesus. Do you know that Jesus not only called political enemies to be his disciples and to love one another, he also conversed with women in public. He also touched lepers. He also ate with tax collectors. He also said to a centurion who represented Roman occupation and oppression, he says, when the centurion asks for healing and bows before Jesus, he says, I have never seen more faith in all of Israel, which would have been an offensive statement. That would be like right here in our city being occupied by another government or another outside force, and someone who represents that occupation, Jesus saying, I've never seen more faith in all of Baltimore than this person. These are all things that Jesus did that crossed the line of division. He didn't maintain these divisions. He crossed them. He broke through them. Jesus defied them. Why? Because the foundation and the essence of COMMUNITAS, which is what Jesus called us to and modeled, is love. That's the foundation of it. That's the essence of it. And not love the way that we define it. Because it's really more like than it is love. Love is sacrificial. And we're going to continue this today. We talked about it in week 1. And we're going to continue it today because I think it's important. Jesus said, and I will remind us of what he said, and we talked about this last week, it's not optional. This is how we should be known, by our love. And it is other-oriented. And see, this is the problem that I'm struggling with is because for those who say that they are Christian, it is not necessarily how we are known by our love. And the language and the nomenclature that we hear and the commentary is not other-oriented. It is demonizing. It is negative. And it is not in the spirit of love. Now, this doesn't mean that we can't confront issues. It doesn't mean that we can't confront things that are not right. There is a way that we are to do it. So let me transition to 2 Corinthians 6 for us as our focal passage today. This weekend, I want to continue talking about love because I think there is a problematic side to love. I think there's a side to this that is very, very challenging for us that we need to talk about, that we need to unpack. And when I talk about love and the reality of real love, I'm not talking about what Mary J. was singing about when she said, I'm searching for a real love. Like, I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about the magic that Coldplay was talking about. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about Crazy in Love, what Beyonce and Jay-Z was talking about. Like, all those are cool songs, and whatever the love song you want to think about. Those are great songs. Those are great artists. I'm not talking about that. What I'm actually talking about is more in line with the song that came out in 1975, which is before most of us were born in this room. A couple of y'all born in, no offense. But it was a song by a group called Nazareth. And the song said, love hurts, love scars, and love wounds. Those words could not be more true. Now, everything else they said in the song wasn't, I don't necessarily agree with. It was, man, they was really hurting. But the sentiment of these opening words, those words that I just read you are the opening words to the song. And it is true. And because it is true, you know what happens? We make adjustments to protect and guard against pain. We make contingency plans. We create acceptable categories. And we cancel bad people. And all of that makes rational sense, right? But it's just not the kind of community that Jesus calls us to. Now, in the context of the passage that we're going to read, the Jesus followers in Corinth, they were having a hard time loving one another. And the Jesus followers in Corinth are no different than the Jesus followers right here in Baltimore, right here in Hopeville, because we all have our issues at times with loving one another. And they were having a challenge with this. So this guy, Paul, who wrote the majority of the New Testament, who wrote letters to try to encourage and coach and teach others of what it means to follow Jesus, he's making an appeal to them, and he's telling them that the ministry and the commitment that they have made to follow Jesus is one that pursues reconciliation. That means pursuing others even when it's more convenient to not. And he goes on to say that Jesus committed us. I don't know if you signed up for this, so I'm here to tell you this today, all right? That Jesus committed us to the ministry of reconciliation. Let me explain that. Jesus committed us to bringing others together. Jesus committed us to pursuing one another. That is the ministry of reconciliation. So if you signed up for the wrong thing and that's not what you thought it was, we're going to turn this way while you walk out. Because that's what it is. And Paul says that it is Christ's love that compels us to do it. Not us, not how we feel, Not what we think or what's rational. It is Christ's love that compels us to do it. And we no longer live selfishly. But the Jesus followers in Corinth, they were having a tough time with this. And so listen to Paul's appeal to them as he's writing to them in chapter number 6, starting in verse 3. Here we go. He says, we are not, and he's talking about him and Timothy and others. He says, we are not giving anyone an occasion for offense, so that the ministry will not be blamed. Instead, as God's ministers, we commend ourselves in everything by great endurance, by afflictions, by hardships, by difficulties, by beatings, by imprisonments, by riots, by labors, by sleepless nights, by times of hunger, by purity, by knowledge, by patience, by kindness, by the Holy Spirit, by sincere love, by the word of the truth, by the power of God, through weapons of righteousness for the right hand and the left, through glory and dishonor, through slander and good report, regarded as deceivers, yet true, as unknown, yet recognized as dying, yet see we live, as being disciplined, yet not killed, as grieving, yet always rejoicing, as poor, yet enriching many, as having nothing, yet possessing everything. We have spoken openly to you, Corinthians. Our heart has been open wide. We are not withholding our affection from you, but you are withholding yours from us. I speak as to my children, as a proper response. Open your heart to us. Simple subject today, just kind of piggybacking off of last week. I want to talk about the challenge with love. The challenge with love. The number one thing that causes us to withhold love or to be guarded is rejection. Rejection does not feel good. It is very hurtful to not be received. And there are many of us who carry significant rejection wounds under the sound of my voice. And as much as we like to forget about those things and try to leave them in our past, we carry them with us. And it's a terrible thing to put yourself out there, to be vulnerable, and it doesn't go well. And the immediate reaction is to never allow that again. That's the problem with love. When you have been hurt in that way, you vow to yourself, I won't put myself in that position again. And it sometimes causes us to harden our hearts. And the Corinthian followers of Jesus, you know what happened? They were likely offended by Paul. Y'all know what happens when we get offended. They were likely offended by Paul and his correction that he had given to them. Now, mind you, Paul, listen, what he is doing is trying to help these Jesus followers understand, like, okay, this is good, like, this is not good. Like, this is how you follow Jesus, like, these things are problematic. This is what he is doing. In 1 Corinthians 4, he's talking to them about faithfulness, not being arrogant, and not to shame them. He says, I'm not trying to shame you. I'm just trying to warn you. You know how you just try to tell somebody something and then they get all mad and then like it's like the end of the world. You're like, man, I was just trying to help you. I was just actually doing a good thing. This is what he says. And then he kind of knew they were in their feelings. So in 2 Corinthians 2, he says, chapter number 2, I considered not even visiting you because I didn't want to cause you pain. I don't want to cause you any harm, is what he said. And so this is likely the scenario here and why Paul is saying what he's saying to them, because there's been an offense. And they're likely not happy with Paul. So there are two things that I want to leave us with that I think relates with the challenge of love. And I think these are two things that we can all relate to, especially this first one. Number one, vulnerability is risky. Some of us are professionals at protecting ourselves. Some of us are professionals at seeming like we're open, seeming like we're, just kind of sharing all the, and we just as closed as we can be. Because vulnerability is risky. Whether you confront someone with a hard truth, that's risky. Whether you decide to be the first person to say I love you, because you don't know if they're gonna say it back or or the feelings are reciprocated, that's risky. Or whether you just tell a person no, that's risky. It is a moment of vulnerability when you decide to put yourself out there that can be rejected. And here's the truth. Corinth, y'all, like Corinth was a city where stuff was popping off. Like it was a cosmopolitan type city. There was a lot of affluence. There was a lot of things to do. There was art. There was all of these different things going on. But there was a loose morality. So they were just kind of loose with how they were living. And they were very much into materialism. And there was a bunch of individualism, disunity, and false teaching. That don't sound familiar to us at all. Disunity, individualism, false teaching. No, we know exactly what that was like. So a lot of what was happening in Corinth is what we experience right here today. And so Paul is confronting all of this dysfunction in this young church that has started. A side note, what also makes COMMUNITAS difficult is people being messy. Now, when I said people being messy, you thought about somebody else, but I'm talking about you. Because all of us have messy tendencies. I just want to make sure we all on the same page. I just want to make sure we ain't walking out of here thinking, see, the pastor was talking about so-and-so. No. We saw it with you, all right? Because we all have these messy tendencies. And that's what makes COMMUNITAS difficult, because of the messiness. And we usually have two responses to it. Either to loosen our stance, like, you know what, I'm just going to ignore that, or I'm not going to say anything about that, or I'm going to let that go, or we're going to leave. One or the other. We're going to loosen our stance on certain, or we're going to leave. And 9 times out of 10, it all ends to leaving, because we can only loosen but so much. And then we out of here. It's much easier to do that. That's much easier than confronting the issues. And what Paul says to the Corinthians is, I'm not trying to offend you. This is what he starts out by saying in verse 3. And then he said basically that this ministry that we are doing is not to offend you. And then he goes on to list all of these things that he sacrificed, listing his track record, how he's been beaten and been in prison and afflicted and difficulties and like hunger and all of these things that he has done. This is my track record. For your sake, he says, this is what I've endured. Why? Because we love you. I just want to take a moment just to be vulnerable myself. Because I think, like, if we want to have a community where we are vulnerable, me as the leader, I have to model vulnerability as well. This is a very difficult season in my life. There are days when it's really, really challenging. And I just want to be honest about that. And the thing that I realize is that when you are a leader, you don't have the same luxuries as other people sometimes. And that sucks. It doesn't feel great. When you have to make certain decisions and you get demonized for them, or like Paul, people forget all of these sacrifices that you've made. They discredit you. Now, I'm not like indirectly calling anybody out. So don't be trying to read like, who he talking about, what he's saying. Like, no. This isn't about like people in this room. This is just a product of the season of life that I'm in that is very hard. It's very, very challenging. And I understand why they say that leadership is lonely, because there are certain things that you just can't talk to everybody about. And so I don't want you all to feel like I'm pushing us to be vulnerable and I'm not willing to share like the challenges that I have personally as I try to lead this community of faith we call Hopeville, as I try to lead my family and my children and make tough and challenging decisions, and even at times confront certain things that are uncomfortable for me and is uncomfortable for the people that I have to confront. And let me just say one more thing too. We love to talk about church hurt, which is a whole separate sermon and maybe even sermon series. But can I tell you that when you get church hurt, you can leave. But when I get church hurt, I got to come back on this stage and face you every week, because this is what the Lord has called me to. And so, listen, I just want us to understand that this whole thing about vulnerability being risky, I share this with you. And that is what COMMUNITAS is all about. Us sharing the disorientation, us sharing the comfort with one another. In Colossians 3:23, and this is my encouragement, and this is my encouragement to you. And this is another letter that Paul is writing to another group of Jesus followers. This is what he says. And the context in which he's saying this is a little bit challenging in terms of what he's calling people to and how he's asking them to submit. And here's what he says in Colossians 3:23. Do whatever you're going to do from your heart as service to God, not to man. So I have to remind myself that I'm obedient to what God has called me to in serving him, and I can't worry about people's response. I can't worry about if I'm going to be liked. I can't worry about if I'm going to be understood. It would be nice, and man, I just need a win every now and then. But my worship and my service is to God. So I need to do what is right in my heart to do, knowing that my reward comes from the Lord. So number one, vulnerability is risky. Number two, if we don't have any vulnerability, then there is no authentic connection. There's a reason why we're in an epidemic of loneliness. It's because we don't have vulnerability. We don't know how to practice that. We are so offended by the least little thing. We out of there. Like we have no grit at all. I was gonna say another word, but grit will work. Like don't use your imagination too much. But we don't have any grit, any true resolve. Listen to what Paul says in verse 12 and 13. He says, "We are not withholding our affection from you, but you are withholding yours from us. Open your heart to us." They were holding back. There was no authentic connection between the two of them, between the people and between them and Paul, because they were holding back their affection. How much deeper, how much wider, how much more fulfilling would the community of faith, would the community of Hopeville be if we didn't hold back our affection? If we didn't hold back, even being inconvenienced, because it's necessary at times. Let me read to you what it says in this book that I read called The Sacred Us. The author Justin Kendrick says, "Without vulnerability, there can be no great connection, not between you and God and not between you and your brother or sister. Relationships will always remain an inch deep until someone is willing to be vulnerable. You must risk exposure and reveal your weaknesses. That is like me saying to Pastor Trevor last week, and he asked me, was I good? And he asked me, was I good? Because he was sensing that I wasn't good. And you know what I said? I'm good. And then we circled back and we had a conversation about it. And I told him all of the things that was happening, which was a long list of why I wasn't good and what he was sensing. And so he asked me just a few minutes ago, hey, are you good right now or will you be good? Which one is it? I'm good right now, actually. But sometimes we say we're good and we're not good. And it messes with our ability to be authentic with one another. But the reason why we're not open and we're not authentic with one another is because sometimes, and I said this already, we're just too easily offended. And I want to just park right there for just a second because I love what Dr. Darius Daniels says. He says, when you're easily offended, you can't be corrected. And when you can't be corrected, you can't grow. And part of the immaturity that we have in the church is because nobody can tell you anything. And we can't grow, and we haven't trusted each other enough to allow each other to speak into our lives and say, hey, I saw this, or I observed this, or I peeped this. Like, yo, I think that's something that we need to address. The essence of love is sacrifice, which means that we need to be okay with not prioritizing feelings. Yes, we consider them, but they don't trump what needs to be confronted. Let me tell you what Kim Scott says. She's a business author. She says, we live in a time of ruinous empathy where we just don't tell people the truth. I mean, little things like, hey, you got something right here you need to wipe. You know, like we just let people walk around with just stuff on their face. You know, just like we won't even pull them aside and be like, hey, you know, you need to wipe that out. Like, I mean, that's a small example, but she says it's ruinous empathy because we're empathetic to the person's situation, but we don't do anything about it, and it's ruining to them. And part of the reason why we have this epidemic of loneliness is because we have no vulnerability. We want friends, but we don't want to fight for the relationship. We want help, but we won't tell anybody we need help. We have no humility. And COMMUNITAS is too hard to not be all the way in with each other. It's not a loose connection. It's being stubbornly loyal in our commitment to each other. We pursue, we prioritize presence with one another, we practice patience, and we do not pretend. Some of us need to write that down. We pursue, we prioritize presence with one another, we practice patience, and we do not pretend. Let me see if I can land the plane like this. The same author that I just referenced, Justin Kendricks, in this book, The Sacred Us, he says we can't be emotionally safe and fully alive at the same time. Meaning that to be fully alive means that we have to have some level of vulnerability with one another. And the reason we don't have COMMUNITAS is because we're just too comfortable with loose connections. And here's the thing, we're drinking the Kool-Aid that the good life is the comfortable life. And the good life is insulating ourselves from our problems and, oh man, let's just have fun. But the research is conclusive that the pursuit of comfort is exactly the opposite. Like, that is our problem. That is what is dividing us. And the Corinthians, they had money, they had affluence, they had status, they had all of these things. But there was so much disunity, dysfunction, and disconnection. Because can I tell you, the good life is not the pursuit of comfort. It is deep connection and community. And in order to have deep connection and community, The foundation of that needs to be love. And the love is not about your feeling. The love is sacrificial. It is a commitment that I am here and that I will be here and that I'm going to pursue you. Even when you frustrate me, even when you make me mad, even when I'm disappointed, I'm going to pursue you because what the enemy wants to do is divide us. If he can keep us divided, if he can talk crazy to us in our ear and get us in our feelings, then he can go on about his business. We're not a threat to darkness. We're not a threat to his kingdom. But the foundation of all of this is unconditional and sacrificial love. And it's uncomfortable because it doesn't always feel good. It isn't always convenient. I wish we could just schedule it and get it done and move on. I wish that we would get calls and ask questions to do things when we're ready to do them, when we feel like doing them. But it doesn't work that way. And the only thing that I'm saying that I want you to understand is that Hopeville desires to be a community of faith that's focused on two things, where we learn how to deepen our discipleship, meaning what does it mean to truly be a follower of Jesus, and we cultivate community or communitas, meaning we are committed to cultivating or creating the kind of community that is deeply committed to one another. Let's pray.